Dr. Michael Fullilove is Director of the Global Issues Program at the Lowy Institute for International Policy, and he believes that a seat at the UN Security Council is very much in our national interests. He joins me in our breakfast studio this morning. Michael, welcome.
Morning, Fran.
Michael Fullilove, critics point to the amount of money a bid like this will cost by the time it's all over. We're talking millions and millions of dollars. It's a lot of money.
I think it's a relatively insignificant sum compared to other exercises in international policy. We don't know what it will cost. It won't cost anything like the crazy estimates that you quoted.
The $1.5 billion?
$1.5 billion. That's just fuzzy maths where someone's added up all the foreign aid that we're going to give in the next few years and somehow claimed that that has something to do with the Security Council. Alexander Downer suggests it'll cost $35 million. If it costs $35 million, that's 1/5 of the cost of one of our new Super Hornet aircraft. It's 1/2 of the cost of one of our new multi-role helicopters. I think these are not significant costs to spend 2 years on the most important crisis management and international body in the world.
But what do we get from it? I mean, why is it? People would say, well, we know what we get from half a fighter jet. What do we get from sitting around at a talk fest in the UN?
We get leverage on all sorts of issues. It adds to our reputation. It adds to our prestige. We are joiners by instinct and practice, Fran, being a small population located a long way away from our historical sources of prosperity and security. We like joining institutions, and the UN Security Council is the pointy end of the international system. It's the body that confers legitimacy on the use of force or denies it. It's absolutely critical to the resolution of international crises. We saw that, for example, in East Timor in 1999. How would our troops have fared in the East Timor intervention if they hadn't had the cover provided by a Security Council resolution?
No argument with that, and there's plenty going on at the moment in the world in terms of difficult crises to be resolved. If you look at the global financial crisis, the climate change talks that are there at the moment, peace talks in the Middle East, disarmament, nuclear proliferation threats. But is any of that the outcome of that change for Australia, as far as Australia is concerned, whether we're sitting around that table or not? I mean, we have a say through general international forums and summits, as we've seen this week.
Well, Fran, all these issues that you mentioned, from climate change to the Afghanistan war to the Iranian and North Korean nuclear programs, they all affect our international security. And what the Security Council does on these issues matters to our security. So why should we be a price taker rather than a price setter? Why shouldn't we back ourselves to get on into the innermost circle, to have our say, to put our views? Why should we be relying on other people to make our arguments at the big table? I think it's past time that we stood up and said, no, we have things to say on these crises. We have something to contribute. We have a century of contributing to international peace and security through the world wars, through UN peacekeeping missions, through missions to East Timor, Solomon Islands, Afghanistan. I think it's in the UN's interest for a credible middle power such as Australia to be on the council, and I think it's very much in our national interests. And most Australians agree, I might add.
It fits right in with Kevin Rudd's aim or declaration that Australia will be positioned in these multilateral negotiations on all these issues as a middle power. Is there a little bit of a vanity factor here for a PM who has set that up as his foreign policy goal?
I think it's good when politicians have ambition, when they have ambition for themselves and they have ambition for our country. I think that's a good thing. And it's bipartisan, I might say. Alexander Downer wanted us to run for the council 5 years ago, but Prime Minister Howard wouldn't let him do it. Look, it's not about vanity and about ambition. It's about contributing to the international system. Even the United States needs the UN. Even the United States needs the Security Council. This week, Barack Obama becomes the first sitting president in history to chair the Security Council in person. Now, if the global hegemon, the most powerful country in the history of the world, thinks it needs the Security Council, why wouldn't we want a chance to contribute to it as well?
It's 8:11 on RM Breakfast. Our guest this morning is Dr. Michael Fullilove from the Lowy Institute. Michael, there are plenty of critics to the whole notion. Some object on cost. Some object because they say this whole lobbying process is grubby and it distorts our foreign policy as we adapt and adjust our foreign policy and try to garner votes from around the world. Deputy Opposition Leader Julie Bishop said the government has, quote, thrown away long-standing foreign policy principles to the wind in its pursuit of a seat. Is that true? It's dangerous if it is.
It's not true. Look, first of all, there's no evidence for any of these specific claims about compromising our values. Secondly, it's pointless to deny that candidates for election from time to time will try to maximise their electoral support. I mean, but let's be realistic. I imagine Julie Bishop does that from time to time in domestic politics as well. But the government's not going to compromise its values, because the whole purpose of this bid is to project our values. There's no point in compromising it. And history shows us, Fran, that just as in domestic politics, you're much better off positioning yourself as a reliable and a predictable and a consistent player than trying to constantly, tack according to the wind. So I don't think that we're in no way compromising our values. I hope that the government is trying to maximise its electoral support in the bid. If it's not doing that, why is it even running?
Well, it is clearly doing that. We know the Governor-General, Quentin Bryce, was busy earlier this year trying to garner support in Africa. Africa has a big block of votes that we'd be needing if we wanted to succeed. Tim Fischer's been busy at the Vatican, lobbying all the diplomats at the Vatican. So it is on this lobbying effort. Can you gauge at this point how Australia is looking in this contest? Because we were a late starter, I think.
We're a very late starter. Our opponents are Finland and Luxembourg, who entered the race in 2001 and 2002 respectively. So we're a late starter, and they have strong cases to make, but we have a strong case to make. So it's difficult as an outsider or even as an insider, because of the opacity of this process, because it's a secret ballot 3 years off, to make judgments about how we're going. But what we can make a judgment on today is whether this is in our national interest. And all these criticisms about cost and compromising values, I feel like saying to the critics, as Alexander Downer did in his 2007 Playford lecture, think big. You know, don't take such a straightened view of Australia's role in the world where you're nitpicking every overseas trip. This is a real opportunity for Australia to play a role as a significant global citizen in the world, to increase our prestige, our position, and most importantly, to make a contribution to international security.
The last time we were on the Security Council, we had a position around the table, was 1984, 1985. Were there any perceived benefits from that back then, at that time around?
Look, there were a number of issues on which we were active, but I think we got leverage on all sorts of issues then and now. I mean, it just increases your role in the international system. It increases your position and your reputation. And
I know you've been doing some polling on this. Surprisingly, well, it surprises me that a majority of Australians think this is a great idea. I thought a lot of people might have thought it was a waste of money. What responses did you get?
Well, we asked Australians whether they agreed with the proposition that we should run for a temporary seat in 2013, 2014. 71% agreed. Of those, 52% strongly agreed, and only 6% disagreed. So the split is 71% in favour and 6% against, which is pretty strong. The problem is, of course, that the 6% who oppose it are also pretty vocal.
Okay, but you are reading this and presenting this as out-and-out popular support?
How would you read it? I mean, we asked them, do they support the bid? And 71% said they did. So I think it is. I mean, that's not to say that most Australians are down into the interstices of this bid and into all the details, but I think in general, Australians know that we have a history of contributing to the international system. They like the idea of us joining international institutions. They like the idea of us participating in debates. And so the idea of us running for the Security Council appeals to them.
And Michael, you mentioned earlier the fact that President Obama will chair a summit meeting of the UN Security Council this week. It's a session on preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and eradicating the world's atomic arsenals. This is a very rare thing. In fact, how often does presidents do this?
It's the first time in history that a sitting US president has actually personally chaired the Security Council. It's a very important sign that the Obama administration takes the UN seriously. Not to say that the UN is flawless or perfect, it has all sorts of imperfections, but it remains the global forum for bringing states together to discuss important issues. It remains a venue for creative statecraft. Obama is using it to throw attention onto nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. There are lots of other issues where the UN is the only forum to discuss these questions.
Michael Fullilove, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Fullilove is the Director of the Global Issues Program at the Lowy Institute.